Back to Hardball. Joining us right now is Colonel Larry Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to General Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State in the Bush administration. Colonel Wilkerson, what do you make of this whole fight? I want to give you a wide open here. What do we know about the way in which intelligence was used to get us into the war in Iraq? Let's start with a little history here. How was it used, misused, if you will, to get us in that war?
Let me just say first, Chris, that was a very powerful segment you had with President Obama shaking hands with John S. McCain IV, and I appreciate it. That's what this country's all about.
Me too, I agree.
I've got my most intimate and vivid view of how intelligence was used because I was sleepless virtually for 4 days and nights out at Langley preparing Secretary Powell for his presentation at the United Nations. I worked intimately with George Tenet and John McLaughlin and their hand-picked analysts from WinPAC and elsewhere in order to prepare the Secretary. And I look back on that now with the knowledge I have now, and I realize that the Secretary of State, and certainly I, were not told the complete truth about the intelligence with regard to Iraq, and that Secretary Powell's credibility was put on the line at the UN, and that if anyone gave the most convincing presentation for war with Iraq, it was he, and it was wrong. That's very disturbing.
Was he duped?
That's a strong word to use. We had so little...
Well, let me ask you, what was the motivation to giving him the bad information? Was bad information all that was available, or was it cooked up? Was it souped up, as we used to say with old cars,
Both.
To make it sound bigger than it was?
Both. Both. Some of it was souped up. Some of it was made bigger than it was. Some of it was tailored very carefully so it would be powerful when, if it had been put in context, it would have been extremely weak. Some of the circumstantial stuff was made to seem more than circumstantial. It was twisted and shaped in a way that made it look definitive. It was a clever job.
Well, my belief is that we were sold on the war by people that want us to go to war, and they cooked up reasons as we went along, and they kept changing to get us in the war. And I don't know if I'll ever get to the bottom of why we went to that war, but the reasons don't add up. Let me ask you this. Did you ever believe that Saddam Hussein had a nuclear weapon capable of reaching our shores? Yes or no? Did you ever believe that after all the briefings? Did you buy that argument that was at the heart of the Cheney argument, the mushroom cloud? It was going to hit us here. We were going to hit with a nuclear detonation on this continent. Did you ever believe that they had a vehicle to get them here, get that weapon here, and they even had a weapon? Do you believe that now? Absolutely not. Read Richard. Well, then why did we sell it? Why did you help sell it?
Read Ambassador Richard Haas's new book, War of Necessity, War of Choice, and I think you'll get as good a shot into that as you might want. Richard actually says he was my boss for the first 18 months at the State Department. He actually says he cannot tell you when we made a decision to go to war. And I can't tell you either.
Why was all this dancing around and everything in this country? Everything was one big choral group singing the same song. We are going to get hit if we don't hit them. We have to occupy, take over, become the bosses of Iraq, or else we will be hit here by a nuclear weapon. That is one hell of a sales job, Colonel. I just want to know what you feel was your role in it. What was General Powell's role in it?
Well,
what role do you think he played in this?
I won't speak for...
I think he played a huge role in it. I think he helped sell it.
I won't speak for Powell. I'll speak for myself. I'm ashamed of it. And that's one of the reasons I'm speaking out. Call it Freudian. I'm trying to gain some relief for myself.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics here. Was torture used to sell us on that war, not to protect us from a ticking time bomb situation, which we all can argue about? And by the way, I think it's a good argument, both sides of that. And I'm not sure what the answer is, what we do. But should we ever use torture to get somebody to say something that justifies a policy? That's apparently what happened with one of these suspects. He was tortured into saying there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and what happened to this country on 9/11. If that's the case, we did something evil to accomplish something evil. It wasn't the ends justify the means. It was evil trying to justify evil.
I agree. And think about this for a moment.
Well, do you know if that happened? Did it happen?
Yes, it did. And the SEER techniques that were reverse engineered in order to do this, think about this for a minute. They were used by North Korea. They were used by North Vietnam. That's how we got them, to get people to confess to war criminals. Yeah, exactly.
In other words, they screwed with guys' brains. They brainwashed people so they'd lie against their country. Not that they'd believe it, but they'd sell it. I want to ask you again, how do you know that we use torture to sell the war?
I have a lot of contacts now, and a lot of people talk to me. and I have enough evidence for me to believe that we shifted priorities from the chatter, as it were, and trying to stop another attack in early or late spring of 2002, and the emphasis at that time began to be on establishing contacts between al-Qaeda and the Mukhabarat in Baghdad, and that was the principal priority.
That's when I began. Well, I was always suspicious of this war. I was always against it because I didn't think there was a reason for it. But let me tell you, when I heard reasons like we're going to war because we hear chatter, well, I began to worry about that. Let me ask you about the language which was used to let me ask you about your role in this. The CIA briefed Colin Powell, your boss. They briefed you. Were they previously prepped by Cheney, the vice president, and his person, Scooter Libby, and by Addington and the others? Did they get over to Langley before you got over there and put the case together that they were going to give to you? In other words, did they tamper with the evidence politically before you got it and before General Powell got it?
Here's how I got flummoxed, I think. They handed me a 48-page, this came from the Vice President's office, a 48-page script on WMD. I think John Hanna in the Vice President's office wrote it. So it wasn't the CIA, it was the neocons working for the VP. Yeah, but we threw that out. Powell and I threw that out after about 8 hours, and we thought we had saved ourselves from what would be otherwise unprovable assertions. It turned out that what was in the October 2002 NIE, National Intelligence Estimate on Iraq, was just about as bad because it had, in essence, been crafted for some of this same stuff over the years.
In other words, let me get back to the same question. Did the ideologues in the Vice President's office, in the Defense Department, we all know their names, the people who wanted this war in the worst way, did they get to George Tenet, who seemed to behave throughout this as more as a staffer than as a principal? He seemed to be behaving in a way that wanted to kowtow to the people in the ideological wing of this administration. Again, did they get to that CIA information before you got it?
I think George Tenet bowed to the power that he was confronted with. I think he compromised his intelligence professionalism because of that power. I think John McLaughlin, his deputy, did the same thing. This is Shakespearean.
Okay. What do you think so? Well, let me ask you about what do you think about Nancy Pelosi? She's in a situation now where she's said, after a number of iterations, she's gotten to the point, I think it's a problem for her, of finally saying last Thursday, 8 days ago, that the CIA misled her. In fact, she let the word lie hang out there without really putting it down, which made it sound like she said they lied. Do you believe the CIA lied or misled the Speaker?
Contrast
on the issue of whether, that we're talking about, whether waterboarding had occurred.
I have no way of knowing, but I will point this out. Peter Hoekstra from my party, the Republican Party, who's the ranking minority leader on the House Intelligence Committee, said this is about the ugliest thing I've seen about the CIA's misleading Congress over the shoot-down in Peru in 2001 that killed the American missionary and her 7-month-old baby. The CIA hid reports from Justice, hid internal deliberations from Justice and Congress, and Hoekstra was furious, and there's an investigation going on right now about that. Historical precedent says that the CIA leadership often misleads the Congress. So this is not anything new, but I have no way of knowing.
Why would the CIA not try to get Congress hooked into the idea of torture? Why wouldn't they want Democrats especially, whether it's whoever, Jane Harmer, or it's the Vice President, or it's the Speaker of the House, why wouldn't they want them to sign on to the torture? Why wouldn't they try to do it? I don't think it happened, but why wouldn't it be in their interest to get those Democrats on the Hill to say, okay, so then they could later say, hey, look, you approved it. Wouldn't that be in their interest to hook them? With any
other administration, I'd agree with you, whether it was Eisenhower and U-2s over the Soviet Union or Kennedy and Cuba or whatever. But with this administration, their last resort was to openness with the legislative branch. Their very last resort.
I think I agree. I think the CIA was mishandled, misused, abused by this administration, and their last friend on earth was Dick Cheney. I think that Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby and the rest of them in his office were at war with the CIA over who should have been blamed for the bad intel that led us into the Iraq war. And there was a fight that went on in this city, and you know, you watched it like I watched it. The leaking that came from the CIA, the counterattacks from the Vice President's office, which we all know about, were famous. Anyway, thank you, Larry Wilkerson. Thank you, Colonel, for coming on, and thank you for your service. Up next, could the